Hi, my name is Cindy Rang with the Fabric Patch in Ephrata, Washington. You can find us at fabricpatch.net. And today I'm going to show you how to turn your favorite panel into a really cool chenille quilt. My daughter and I have owned and operated a busy quilt shop in Washington State for over 20 years. We have a retreat center, an active YouTube channel, and a large pattern line featuring our creations. My two sons work on machines. One daughter-in-law is our videographer and the other is a long-arm quilter. We are a family that love each other, we laugh together, and every once in a while we get some work done. We have a crew that are saints for their efforts at keeping us on track. Thanks for joining us on our wild ride. So chenilling is not really a new technique. I think people have been chenilling for a while. We have a couple other videos about the chenille process, but what we want to show you today is how you can pick and choose what you want to chenille. So for this particular one, the only thing that is chenilled, you can see, is just the sheep itself. There is a pattern and it kind of talks about the whole process and exactly how to do it. So you can do something like that if you just want the entire thing to be chenilled, but I do think it's kind of fun to find a really cool panel or some blocks and you just want to do some chenilling. So, and I want to show you, this happens to be a Susie's Zoo panel. They have just the cutest artwork. This particular Lou the sheep is his name. He comes, or she, I'm not sure, I think it's a he, comes on a blue background, a yellow background, or a pink background. You do need 3 or 4. We'll talk about that. There's also Purr the cat, and the cat only comes on the yellow background, and it's a big oversized panel. So these are like 36 by 42, or there's also this penguin, mom and baby penguin. And what can happen is when you do decide to, oops, there it is. When you do decide to just chenille certain parts of it, you could look at this and decide you're only going to chenille just the black part of the penguin or only the penguin tummy or whatever. So you get to kind of pick and choose what you want to do. So let's first talk about notions, and then we'll talk about your fabric requirements, and then I'll show you the process and exactly how you do it. So in terms of notions, the two things that you really have to have is you have to have some sort of a marking utensil to get your lines lined up. And again, I do like the friction marker because as soon as I iron it, it comes off, but it's up to you. So something to mark on the top of your fabric. The other thing you need are some long quilting pins, sturdy quilting pins. You do have to use pins for this process. I know a lot of you, like me, love to use the clips, but the clips will not work for this. The other thing that we suggest is you always want to start with a new needle. You're going to be sewing through multiple layers, and so it's just best so you're not having frayed thread and weird skip stitches, just to go ahead and put in a brand new needle because it's going to get a little bit of a workout. And then the other thing that we kind of suggest are some of these other notions. I've talked about this foot before. It's called the wing foot, and you'll see when I'm sewing how I use it. But what's really nice is that if I use this foot, I only have to start with one line. I don't have to draw all of my lines. And so we'll talk about this again in a minute. If you don't have this foot, you're only going to make one project. You don't have to have it, but I use this foot for a lot of stuff. The other thing is you're going to need some appropriate cutting utensils for when it's time to actually do the chenilling. Because of course what's happening is we're sewing all of these lines and then we're cutting in between there. So you can just use your regular scissors. If you have some good fabric scissors that you want to use, that's okay. But I'm just going to tell you that whole movement, cutting all through all of those strips, your hand is going to cramp up. You're not going to like it. So there's two options. One option is these scissors, and we'll show you how these work. But what happens is you still press down, but they're kind of reverse action. And so they're spring loaded. So it's not quite as difficult to cut. But if you really like the chenilling process, it's a bit spendy. It's about 30 bucks, but this is a chenille cutter. And all that happens is it just cuts right through it. And we'll demonstrate this. We do a lot of chenilling, so this is really worth it. It saves a lot of time, saves your hand, super easy to use. And there's two different brands. I have to tell you that I have not yet used the Fiskars brand. They're the same price. This is the one that I'm used to, and this is the one that I'll be demonstrating, but I think they're essentially the same. All right, I'm going to clean this up, and then I'm going to lay out the fabric, and then we're going to talk about fabric requirements. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about fabric requirements. So the pattern specifically says to use 3 panels for your basic chenille or 4 panels for extra snuggly. We did use 4 on this one, and so there's a lot of lusciousness in here because it's 3 layers of chenille, and then there's that background piece, and then there's also the backing. So that's kind of what I have laid out here. This is what my back piece is going to be. I did not put batting in it. You can if you want to, but it is quite heavy with your 4 or 5 layers of fabric, so you don't have to put batting in it. So it's a decision that you can make for yourself. And then you decide with your layers. Now what's happening with this is that we're going to layer them exactly. We're going to sew our rows on the diagonal. It's very important that you're sewing on the bias so that that's what's bursting are the bias fibers, and then you're cutting it. So of course, the more layers that you're cutting, the more chenille it's going to look. I think that's a term. So your other option is that if you have some leftover, maybe you have some white flannel or some gray flannel or a couple other things that are just left over anyway, you could put those in there if you'd like to. But what I always like to mention is that what's nice about this is that whatever the design was, even the little bee in here, you're able to see it because it was the exact panel that was being chenilled. If you start adding other colors and other layers in there, it's still going to look chenille, but it's almost going to have kind of a stripe effect. And the reason that it's going to have kind of a stripe effect is because that second layer or that third layer that's in there, you're only going to see here, then there, then there, then there. So there is literally a stripe, and that's what you'll see. So I just like to mention that. And that's why what makes this so cute is that we've used 3 or 4 exact panels. So that's what we're going to do with this one is we have just our backing. We have our 2, and here is our 3rd, Lou the sheep with the pink background. And we're just going to lay this out. We are choosing not to put batting in it because we think it's going to be heavy enough. And so as you lay it out, you do want to kind of line it up. And I usually start by kind of lining up my selvage because I know that that's probably pretty close. All right, so we have it all laid out. Backing, 3 layers. Again, it's quite thick. You can make your own decision about batting. Now I'm going to mark my line, and then I'm going to show you how to pin. So to mark your line, it's really going to be your 45-degree angle. Again, super important to make sure that you're sewing on the bias and cutting on the bias. If you do this a different way, maybe you decide that you really want them to be lengthwise. When you cut that, you're going to have all of those warp threads or those weft threads, and it's just going to be a big old stringy mess. So if you've ever tried to do chenille and for some reason it turned into strings, that's what happens. And so you do have to make sure that you stay on that bias, because what happens is your fibers are going together like this. So when you cut there and it bursts, that's what happens, is it's just a tiny little thread that pops up, and that's what we want to see. So I've got my ruler and I have my appropriate marking pencil. And again, for me, I'm using my friction marker, but whatever you feel comfortable with. And what I'm going to do is find my 45-degree line. And I know that I'm lined up straight here, and I'm just going to draw my line. Now for me, I am going to do my special foot. Let me get this line drawn for you so you can see this. Okay, so this is my 45-degree line. What I'm going to do is I am going to use my foot. Let me grab it here. I'm going to use my wing foot. And what my wing foot does is that as I am sewing through this, when I get to the bottom and it's time for me to turn around, all I have to do is turn around and decide which line I'm going to line up. And I probably will go ahead and take my little wet erase marker and I'm going to mark that line and I'm going to mark that line, because what's unique about this foot is that it's evenly spaced all the way out. So once I've marked it, what I'm going to do is as they come up this way, I'm just going to line it up on that previously sewn line. And then as I spin around and go the other way, I'm going to line it up on that previously sewn line. And then I spin around the other way, I'm going to line it up on that line. And so that's what I'm going to just keep doing, is working my way out so I don't have to worry about lines. If you don't have this foot, this of course fits a FAF machine. If you don't have an option for a foot like that, of course your other option is just to go ahead and mark the lines. It's not a big deal. You can go ahead and do that and then just sew right on those lines. So you have to do this before you do any of the pinning. The other thing too is you want to kind of decide how far apart. I kind of feel like a 1/2 inch is my magic number, partly because that's easy to go ahead and draw those lines. And also it gives me kind of a nice chenille. You can experiment with that just a little bit, and you can do chenille that's a little bit closer together or a little bit farther apart and have some little test pieces and see what you think. Again, I kind of tend to like that 1/2 inch mark. So you can mark the whole thing if you'd like to, or use a specialty foot. I am using my specialty foot. So since I only had to put my one line on, now it's time for me to go ahead and start pinning. So the reason for pinning is we want to make sure that all 3 of these panels line up exactly right? Because again, if we look at this, that's what makes this look so cute, is that whether the flowers are heavily chenilled or the bee is not chenilled at all, or whatever you see, it's you see the same thing. It's very dimensional. And so it's important that everything line up exactly right. So where's my pins? So here's my pins. So the way that you do this, it's really very simple. You're going to start in the center and you find the exact same mark on that panel and put that pin right through all of those exact same marks. So I'll show you. So I might start with, I'm going to start with something kind of obvious and easy. I'm going to start with the poor little bee's, the end of his antenna. So I'm going to put my pin through here, and it's a little bit cumbersome, but I'm going to open up. I'll see if you're able to really see this, and you probably, maybe you can. So see right there, I'm going to put the pin through the next one, and then I'm going to go to the third one. And do you see it? I'm going to put it through the next one. And then I'm just going to go ahead and pin it through the back. So I'm going to lay this out so it's nice and smooth. And then what I do is I actually put it down so that I know that everything, so I know that all of those layers are identical. And so now that I know that, now I'm going to pull this out just a tiny bit and set that pin. Refluff a little bit. This is going to be the longest process. Well, yeah, pretty much the longest process of the whole thing. Smooth it all out and begin again. You don't have to put them extremely close together. I would say you could probably go about 3 or 4 inches. You just don't want anything to be slipping. So I would probably go to, let me go over here. So see this swirl right here and the tip of the swirl? That's what I'm going for. Tip of the swirl. I'm going to open this up. Oh, no, I'm not. I have to go the opposite direction because I'm opening this way. I should have known that that was going to happen. I'm going to do the tip of this swirl. Because what will happen is as I'm working this way, and then I'm going to work on the other side and go this way, work on the other side and go this side. because as you get a little bit closer, you'll see it's going to be a whole lot easier as you're lifting it up. So tip of this swirl, tip of that swirl. Sorry, it looked different for some reason. I didn't notice that until the third one. Is that funny? Okay, start over. Tip of the swirl, tip of the swirl, tip of the swirl. And then the only reason that I look at the backing is I just make sure that everything is nice and smooth. All right, smooth it all out. Make sure everything, back it out just enough. To seat my pin. And you just kind of want to make sure that your pins are kind of all going sort of the same direction, obviously, so you don't skewer yourself. All right, I'm going to keep going this direction. You won't have to pin the entire thing. What I do is I'm pretty good about pinning the part that I'm going to chenille. But out here, I'm not going to chenille this, so I probably will just put some fairly sparse pins in this. This will all be quilted. You don't want it to shift, but again, you can kind of decide for yourself. You can also, if you wanted to add some extra layers, maybe underneath this poof of hair, we want to add about 2 or 3 extra little layers of white in there. We can go ahead and put that there and make sure that it's pinned in the right spot. So as you're going, as you're pinning, you have time to think about fun little bonus things you want to do. Okay, so just really quickly, if you do decide to add, maybe you want to add some extra under the flower, or we're going to add some extra tuft of hair up here. One thing that you just want to keep in mind is that it still has to be something that's cut on the bias. So you might have an urge for a moment to take this piece of fabric and turn it this way, right? So if you turn it this way, and then you're doing your little 45-degree angle, you can see that on this fabric, that is not going to work. You will end up with a big old stringy mess. So make sure that you're still doing the same thing. And even though we have this, I think we cut an 8 by 7 inch piece, we still want to make sure that it's going this way. We don't have to trim off any of the extra. We don't have to cut it exactly like that. The only thing you want to keep in mind is that you have to make sure that it's not the back one, but it can be in between the back and the second, or the second and the top, but it can't go underneath that. So, because you have to see that bottom piece, because we don't cut the bottom layer. All right, so I'm going to tuck it under there. Feel like it's in the right spot. It's going to make it ever so slightly challenging as you're pinning through there, but not horrible. Really, if you look at this, I've probably got, 3 pins to put in there. And so it's not going to be that big of a deal, but it's going to be totally worth it. All right, I'm going to keep pinning. So you can see that as you get closer and more things are pinned, the panel is really pretty much right on top of each other. So if you look here, so like I have all 3 layers, I'm just going to put it right in that little spot right there. And if I look, you always want to double check. Sure enough, it's right on there. And the next one, oh, the next one I was off by just a smidge. Okay, so I have all of the pins in, and I know that we fast forwarded and jumped around a little bit in there, but I'll tell you that in real time, it took about, I don't know, somewhere between 30 and 45 minutes. It doesn't take very long, and you can see that I don't put them super close together. Somebody else might tell you to go a little bit closer together, but here's the deal. For me, for this particular project, we are only going to chenille the lamb. And so it's important that the bee stay pretty much where it is, and the flowers and all of those things, so it doesn't look too bajiggity. But again, when you look at that, it is bajiggity anyway, right? Because that's what you're seeing, is you're seeing all of those layers. So you don't have to go crazy with the pins. But the other thing is that once you get that, and I don't know if you noticed, but as we were going through it, the more pins you got in, the more straight it was, so that I could just kind of, you probably fast forwarded through all of this, but I'll just show you that you could just kind of jab. And then as you look, you'll see it's pretty much right where it should be. And then you could kind of pin it. So you do still have to check it, but it gets to where it's a whole lot easier after you get started and after you get closer. And because of that, once you get it done, you can see that there was a couple spots that I thought, oh my gosh, I totally missed it. So one is right here. But by the time I realized it, I couldn't make it back in there. So I am just going to say that for me personally, I'm just going to go ahead, and I know that everything is fussed with all the way around there. So if I put a pin in right here, just to kind of hold everything in there, I know that life is going to be good. I can really kind of do the same sort of thing on this outside edge, because what's going to happen is all of this is going to be chenilled, but all of out here is not going to be. It's just going to be quilted. So we don't want anything to slip, but all we really have to do is just go ahead and pin it, just to kind of hold all of these things where they need to go. The other thing, and I mentioned this in the beginning, that you want all of your pins to go one direction, and that's just for safety. It's just because then I know where I can smooth and what's going to jab me. And so that's why I do that. I think that's, oops, that was the only thing. All right, so now that it's all pinned, and again, I could add a couple extra pins if I want to. Now it's time to go ahead and sew it. So I think at the beginning I had when I was showing you how to layer it, I had my backing down. But what will happen is that when you're pinning everything, you are going through your 3 or 4 layers exact, right on the end of that swirl, right on that polka dot, right on the eyeball of the bee, whatever you're doing. But you don't have that same reference. And so your back could get a little bit wonky and you could end up with some funny little folds in it. So I wouldn't really pin through the back. It also will give you an opportunity to make some decisions about what you're going to do with it, and if you want to chenille it first and then turn it into a quilt, add borders, and then quilt the whole thing, or what you'd like to do. So so this is ready to just be chenilled and be a part of something else if that's what you'd like to do. But for us, we know that this is the size it's going to be. So I'm just going to set this aside. Now I'm going to sew through all of the layers. So this is where I could decide to go ahead and put a batting if I wanted to do that. What I'm going to end up doing though is acting as if I am machine quilting through all of the layers on my machine. I am sewing. I do have my feed dogs. Everything is going to be all right, but it does still have to be pinned, or you can use your spray baste it, whatever you'd like. And so what I'm going to do, since I've got all of these pins anyway, I'm going to layer everything just the way that I would like it. I'll just give myself a little bit of extra space here. All right, and then without skewering myself, I'm just going to add a couple of extra pins. So all I need to do is just pin through all of those layers. My first 3 are already exact. All I'm doing is adding the backing and batting, if that's what you prefer. And this is a whole lot easier than trying to make sure that that back stays straight while you're going through all of the others. But you do want to make sure you secure it. Otherwise, when you are quilting everything together, if you've ever quilted and then gotten done and you find that you have a funny little fold or a pinch or a pleat in the back, that's what that's from. The other thing when I use straight pins, you probably noticed when we were pinning, is I pin all the way through to the top, just to make sure that they're not going to slide out. All right. Once it's all pinned, it's time to start sewing. So the deal with sewing is that I'm going to start right in the center here, and I'm going to, you do have to backstitch. The reason that we typically don't backstitch in quilting is because when you've sewn that seam, you're always going to sew right over the next one and right over the next one, and everything kind of builds. So we don't typically backstitch. But in something like this, when we're stitching, this is going to be the top of that, right? So we're going to stitch, so we'll back stitch and then go ahead and go on this line and then back stitch at the bottom, because nothing else is going to be over the top of that to hold that in place. If you happen to sew on a machine that has that as a setting, you can hit your back stitch. It'll take those first 3 stitches and sew, and then at the end it'll take those last 3 stitches and you don't have to think about it. So either way. So what I'm going to do, that's all I'm going to do. Start here, back stitch, sew down, back stitch, turn around, back stitch, sew on this one, back stitch, turn around, and again using my, I'm going to use my specialty foot. You might decide to mark all of your marks, whatever you'd like to do. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of time to do that, and then I'm going to go ahead and just show you at the end when I have all of my lines sewn, and then I'm going to show you how to cut it, quilt it, and finish it up. Okay, we have it all sewn, and not only all sewn, we have it all cut. So I'm going to come back to this in just a second, and we're going to first show you how to cut it on a little different project. All right, so you can see here, this is our piece. This is our little line that we drew, and then we sewed half inch, half inch, half inch, half inch all the way around. Already kind of started cutting a little bit. But you have two different options. One are these snips that we had talked about before, and all you really need to do is just put these in here and just cut that line. You're kind of trying to stay right in the center there, and pretty much your scissors will stay in there. If you like raggedy quilts, if you're doing like the rag rug, something like that, these work pretty good. Oh, and if you realize that you only cut through one layer and not through your 2 layers or your 3 layers, you can certainly cut again. If something happens and you accidentally cut all the way through even your base layer, what you can do is you can just put a little patch. You just want to do right sides together, put a little patch. I have an example of that right here. So when you've cut through all the way, here's my little patch. All we did is we just put it on the back, sew it all the way around. Here's another one where you just, cut all the way through. You don't want to cut all the way through because then what you've got right there is batting. So you just put your little patch on there. All right, this is how the chenille cutter works. So with the chenille cutter, same thing. You're just going to find your edge, and then you've got your little blade. So you're just going through your 2 layers. And you're just pushing it. It works really well. If you find that it's a little bit problematic to get started, you can start a little snip if you'd like to. And then just do the same thing, and again, it's about, I don't know, $30, $34 for it. If you feel like you like chenille, it's absolutely worth it. Because it makes it so easy. And what'll happen is you have all sorts of different sizes here, depending upon the groove that you've sewn through. So it works really well. So this particular project, if you just want to play around with a little bit, that's what this was we went ahead and cut all of this, and then we just did a second one. We put wrong sides together and sewed around the edge, and we ended up with a double-sided chenille hot pad. What we used with this, because we wanted everything to show through, is just this Moda toweling. So it comes in all kinds of different colors, kind of looks like this. There's different options. So you have like these fun little stripes in there. So it works really well. Your other option, there's a couple other things. This stuff is just this chenille tape. And the way that this works is it comes in multiple different colors, and then there's different sizes. So you might have just the little 3/8 or the 5/8 inch size. And if you like the look of chenille, but you really want to have something that's more specific, and maybe you just want to have a chenille flower or just a chenille leaf, that's what you use these for. Is you might want to have 2 layers or 3 layers or 4 layers, whatever you'd like. You just lay this down, and it is already bias, so you can lay it however you'd like to lay it. You can do a monogram, and then you're just going to sew right down the center. You can pretty much just eyeball that and sew through the center, but if you happen to have a chenille foot for your machine, all you have to do is you just thread it in there. I'm going to make this look difficult, but you just thread it through there. There you go. And then what will happen is then you're just going to automatically sew through the top of that. So this is another option, makes it kind of fun. One other thing I just want to mention is that before we talk about how to finish up your sheep, is that if you decide just to chenille all of your leftover fabric because you love doing it, you think it's kind of fun, I just want to show you that anything with polyester in it will not chenille. Those fibers, they don't do the same thing. They're a bonded fiber, so they're not a woven. And so you can wash it as many times as you want and nothing is going to happen. If you want to know what it's going to look like before you wash it, you can just take a nice stiff brush. They do make a chenille brush. You can use a firm toothbrush. You can use all kinds of things. And then all you have to do is you can just tear it up, basically, is what you're doing, just to be able to kind of see what that chenille looks like. Because what's going to happen is all of these fibers are going to burst in the wash. So you put it in the washing machine, put it in the dryer, and really after you wash it about 3 times, it's going to look great. It'll look better and better and better every time you wash it as more and more of these fibers burst. They'll burst all the way down to where you sewed your center line. Okay, so here's the big view. Super cute, right? So let's go ahead and take a look at it. Oh, I don't know if we can see it all from the overhead. So you can see it's all been cut. And so what we did was we started down here. And again, we've backstitched, sewed the line, backstitched on all of these, and then cut through all of them. This was where we added that extra little layer. So you won't really be able to see that until it's washed. When it's been washed 3 times, all of a sudden you really will start to see that there's more fullness in here. We decided not to chenille the flowers. We left those, but we are chenilling the bee. You can decide to do whatever you'd like to do. What you want to do to finish this is that what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and quilt around the outside edge. It is still a quilt. You're just going to need to do something. You could tie it if that's what you'd rather do, whatever you'd like to do. And then, of course, put your binding on it and you're good to go. And you won't get to see this one all the way finished and washed, but it's going to look exactly like this guy. This guy has been washed twice is all. And the only thing that'll be a little bit different is that she'll have a little bit whiter because we added that layer of white, and you'll be able to see that. And a little bit more fullness up here with her hair. The only other difference is that instead of seeing chenilled flowers, the flowers will be flat. All right, I think that's everything we know about chenille. We hope that you give this a try, and thanks for hanging out with us.
Thank you for watching our video. We invite you to leave a comment, hit the like button, or better yet, subscribe to our channel so you never miss an episode. You can also visit our Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, or Pinterest pages, or find all of those things and our online store at fabricpatch.net.